There are moments in history that don't make it into the textbooks and are rarely talked about by those who lived through them. This is one of those stories, and it took place in Tulsa, Oklahoma almost 83 years ago. I bring you this story today because while it's Black History Month, a time in which we honor the lives and contributions of African Americans, it's also a time to remember those who have fallen victim to bigotry and hate.
Now, back in my day, there didn't no blacks live over here at all.
At 100 years old, Otis Clark has seen Tulsa, Oklahoma undergo plenty of change. In fact, he was born here even before Oklahoma was a state.
It was an Indian territory. Tulsa was not a state then. It was a territory.
The state of Oklahoma emerged a few years later, after oil was discovered there. In no time at all, the sleepy little town of Tulsa started teeming with people looking to strike it rich. But as quickly as this was becoming the land of opportunity, it was just as quickly becoming a land of inequality.
Oklahoma was one of the first states to pass certain types of laws segregating whites and blacks. And as a result, when an African American came to live in Tulsa, they pretty much had to live in a certain neighborhood on certain blocks and couldn't live or shop or work anywhere else.
Between 1910 and 1920, Tulsa was thriving as a city, and as it grew in size and wealth, so did the stresses and strains of segregation. Kenny Booker grew up in Tulsa during that time and remembers it well. Lynch mobs were a real threat then, huh?
At that time?
Yeah.
Yes.
There was the underlying fear in the black community that if you showed any sort of disrespect to whites, you might face the vigilante justice of the Ku Klux Klan. But there was very little to fear if you were in Greenwood. Greenwood was Tulsa's black community, separated from the rest of the city by a set of railroad tracks.
Being in the black neighborhood was good for the Negro because he felt free.
For the most part, blacks were not allowed to shop or dine in white establishments, so here in Greenwood, black-owned businesses catered to a growing black community. There were movie theaters, textile shops, even black-run newspapers. In fact, this part of town was so successful, it was called Black Wall Street.
We had confectionaries where we could have ice cream and sodas and all that kind of stuff.
So life was pretty nice.
Well, we lived rich, Todd. We lived rich back then.
For Kinney, Otis, and the thousands of other African Americans, life in Greenwood was close to perfect. But all of that was about to change. Something would happen one afternoon in 1921 that set into motion a horrific chain of events.
This was an absolutely terrifying event, and the number of people who lived through it have still been scarred for all of their lives for enduring this horrible moment.
On May 30th, 1921, two teenagers met in an elevator inside this building, and what happened changed the course of history. Dick Rowland was a 19-year-old shoe shiner who came here to the Drexel building because it was the only building in downtown Tulsa where blacks were allowed to use the restroom. He came inside here, which at the time was a passenger elevator operated by a 17-year-old white woman named Sarah Page. What exactly happened inside this elevator isn't known. We do know Sarah Page screamed and there were allegations of an assault.
By 7 o'clock that night, there was an angry lynch mob of at least 500 white Tulsans gathered outside the courthouse where Dick Rowland was held. A little after 7:30, 75 African-American men, many of them World War I veterans, drove down to the courthouse to offer their services to help protect the jail. They were turned away, and as they were leaving to go back to Greenwood, a white tried to disarm an African-American vet and said, "Give me your gun." The black vet said, "Like hell I will." A struggle ensued, a shot went off, and then the worst incident of racial violence in American history began at that moment.
Whites far outnumbered the blacks, and in no time, thousands of gun-toting white men stormed into Greenwood. They began setting fire to homes and businesses and shooting those who tried to fight back.
I don't know what happened to the whites back there, but they're just killing all the black folks they could find.
Those who weren't killed were rounded up and sent to holding areas. The National Guard was brought in to help restore order. But when the smoke cleared, the level of devastation was apparent.
Our home was burnt down, and buildings was burnt down.
I still can't forget it. I never will forget it. I dream about it sometimes now. Never will forget that. It's a horrible day.
It was a horrible day that was not to be discussed.
The city fathers in Tulsa realized they had a terrible blot on the image of their city. They didn't want people to think that Tulsa was an unsafe place where they could do business. So very quickly the story of the riot became buried.
Only in the last few years, when the state launched a commission to research the riot, have people in Tulsa started talking about it again.
The blacks didn't want to talk about it because of fear of another race riot. That's what I think. And the whites didn't want to talk about it because it was shame what they did. They're just not coming to the point where they're making apologies.
What do you think about the apologies?
Well, they're late coming to better late than never, though.
At the time of the riot, it was reported that some 30 people died. But historians, survivors, and scientists have teamed up, and they believe they found several unmarked mass graves around Tulsa. Today, it's widely believed that more than 300 people were killed in the Tulsa race riot. It really is incredible that for so many years, it was buried and no one talked about it.